Hey Dev Team, welcome back to Flutter with Drag. In the last episode on our quiz app, we managed to get our quiz loaded in from the JSON, and now I want to set it up so we can update this over the internet. But to do this, I'm also going to need to create a settings repository because the part of what I want to do is make sure we only update it occasionally, i.e. not every time the app runs, but maybe once a week, every 7 days. That's a choice that you can make. So I'm going to kick off by making our settings repository. So in our repositories folder, I'm going to create a new file, which we'll call settings_repository.dart. Okay. Now the settings repository is going to take a Hive box in order to save settings, and so what we're going to do is the same thing that we did for our quiz repository when we created, our future constructor. So let's run through that and do that again for our settings repository. So we have a class settings repository, and we're going to have a box. So we're going to have a final box which is private. In order to store that box, let's import the Hive there, Hive Flutter or Hive adapters, doesn't really matter. In order to store that, we need a constructor. So we're going to have a settings repository that is going to pass in the box, and then in our initializer we'll say our private box equals the box that has just been passed in. Okay, now we need to make sure that we go through some asynchronous functions first of all. So I'm going to make sure this is private, so it can't be accessed from outside, and we're going to create a static future called settings repository, called create, that returns a settings repository. That is going to be an async function, and in here we're going to create a box, and we're going to await Hive to open the box, which we're going to call settings. Stick an equal sign in there will help. We can then return our settings repository with a box, because we can call the private one from within inside itself. Okay, now I'm going to use getters and setters to set the settings, and the reason for that is Hive is only storing the value. We need to sort of, when we get it back out, we need to clarify the type, we need to cast the type. You'll see what I mean. So the first setting I want to save is when was the quiz last updated. So let's do the setter for that first of all. So set last updated, and that is going to have a value, and we can then put box, put the key, and this is going to be last updated, and the value is going to be whatever was put in. And then the getter for that is going to be get last updated, and that's going to return the box get key last updated as a date time. We know that's a date time, and so we'll cast it to a date time, so we ensure that that's what gets sent back out, and we can be explicit about that and add that at the beginning. Now if you remember, box get also allows us to have default, and I do want a default value, and the default value is going to be date time from microseconds since epoch 0. Save that. Okay, so epoch is the 1st of January 1970, midnight, and that's how timing works. It's the number of microseconds or milliseconds or seconds, days, weeks or years from that date. So if we haven't got that value in the Hive, we're going to set a date essentially a very long time ago. All right, so we can save that, and then we're going to need to make this somewhere, and I'm going to do that in the same place that we made our quiz repository here. And here we're going to set up our settings repository, which we'll call SR, and that's going to equal to await settings repository create. Okay. Now, our quiz repository is going to need access to our settings repository. So I'm going to pass that in to our quiz repository. So let's come to our quiz repository here. And in here, we will also have a final settings repository called settings repository. And we'll require that to be put in. And again, in our initializer, we will say our private settings repository is going to equal the one that we've just passed in, and it's going to be required. Okay. Now, in our create, we need to accept a settings repository and pass it on here. And so now if we save that and save that, hang on, what have I done wrong here? I need to put that in named brackets, and I also need to set that as required. Okay, if we save that and save that, we've now got our setting repository being passed through. Let's do a hot reload, hot restart, make sure everything is still working, which it seems to be. Excellent. Okay. Now we have that settings repository available to us. Right at the bottom of our quiz repository, we're going to make a function called check for update, and that's going to return a future of void for now. We might change that at some point, and it's going to be an async function. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, first of all, we want to check to see whether the app should be updated or whether we're still within this time frame. So we're going to say date time last updated equals our settings repository last updated. So that is either going to be the time it was last updated or the 1st of January 1970. And then we can say if date time now difference to the last update is greater than the duration of days 7, then we'll do our update. Print do our update. Okay, let's save that. Now we need to call this from somewhere. So when are we going to call that? Well, let's save this. I think we're going to call this when we show our quiz page list. Now, currently we have our home page, and that just dumps out the entire list. I think what we want to do at this point is, yeah, we'll do it here, is we're under the home page where we have our list, we're going to create a cubit, and this is going to be the home page cubit. Now, cubit is like a block. It is a block, but it's a cut down version of a block, and in fact a block is built on a cubit, but a cubit doesn't require quite as much boilerplate, but it's slightly a little bit more limited. In our case, it'll do for what we're trying to do. Yeah, so we come to our homepage cubit, and here it's going to be we're not going to have a state, we're going to have a list of quiz, and we'll import that from our models. And our super is going to be an empty list. So when we first hit our home page, we're going to have an empty list of quizzes. Now let's set this up. Let's save that and come back to our home page. We're going to wrap our scaffold with a block provider, and the block provider here is going to be our home page cubit. I've got a lowercase p. Okay. Let's import that. Okay. Now that cubit is going to need access to our quiz repository. So to do that, we can set in, or we've got it here, our quiz repository. So let's just copy that and put it there. And we're not going to be loading in the quizzes like this any longer, so we're going to comment that out. Let's come back to our homepage cubit and accept that. So we're going to be taking in here a required quiz repository and we're going to save that to a final quiz repository. And so before we call our super, we're going to, in our initializer, we're going to set our quiz repository to be the quiz repository that's just been passed in. Save that. And now we're going to create within our class, we're going to create a function called load quiz list, because we're going to need to load the quiz list, and we're going to emit a quiz list repository load quiz list. So basically the state of this cubit is just going to be the quiz list. Okay, let's save that, come back to our home page. Now we need to wrap our quiz list inside a block builder, and the block builder is going to be the homepage block cubit, and it's going to return a list of quiz. Okay, so now in here we can say in our builder, quizzes is going to get replaced with state, because the quiz list is now stored within the state. But also within the builder, we can say if state is empty, then return a center child circular progress indicator. else it's going to build our list. Let's save that and refresh. And so when that refreshes, our quiz list is empty. So now we need to load the quiz, and we can do that from our cubit. We can create within our constructor, we can call load quiz list. Like so, and refresh, and we have our quizzes back. But also within our quiz list now, we can call our quiz repository and check for update. And we can await the return of that and add the async modifier. So now, eventually, when we hit refresh, we restart the application and we don't check for update because our 7 days haven't passed. Let's change that to seconds so we can test this and hot restart our app again. And there we are, we've got do our update. And restart again, we won't because we'll be with, well, we may be out of our 7 seconds. Let's change it up, let's say 7 minutes and refresh. And of course, we're never updating the time. Okay, let's put it back to seconds. Once we've done our update, the next thing we're going to need to do is in our settings repository, we need to set our last updated to date time now. Right, let's try that again. So if we refresh, it'll get an update. If we refresh again, it shouldn't, and again, hasn't, and again, has 7 seconds have passed. Okay, so that's all working for us. Now we just need to do the code to get the data off the internet. To do that, we're going to use a package called HTTP. So Control P, add update dependencies, HTTP. Let's get that dependency added. Okay, and we also need a web server to get our data from. So for now, I'm just going to come and within our root folder here, I'm going to create a new folder called server. In there, I'm going to create a new file called index.html. And using Emmet, I'm just going to create a very quick web page. That's not really important. What is important is I'm coming to get our quiz JSON, and I'm going to copy that and paste that into the server. Then, using one of the tools we installed at the very beginning, I'm going to hit this Go Live button to run a live web server. And I now have a web server running on my local host at port 5500. If you haven't got that, or you don't want that, or you've got access to a web server, feel free to use a web server. Bear in mind, for an app, you need to use a HTTPS web server. It needs to be on the secure protocol. Okay, so how are we going to do this check for update? Well, where we've got print do our update, what we need to do is get a response from the web server. So var response equals await. And first of all, I forgot, we need to import HTTP. So import HTTP package as HTTP. Okay, so await HTTP dot get, and in there we need to put the URL, but it needs to be a URL. You can't just put a string in there. It needs to be a URI. So to do that, we can put URI dot parse, and then we can put a string. Now, you can't use localhost or 172 if you're using an emulator. You need to use 10.0.2.2 and then the port that your server is running on. And then it's in the server directory and it's called quiz.json. Okay. Once we've got that, we're going to decode that. Var data equals JSON decode, and it's the response body that we need to decode. We're not putting any error checking in here. We will do that at some point in the future. And then, as we did before, we're going to say for var q in data quiz equals quiz from map q, and then we need to store that in our box put the quiz ID, and then we'll put in the quiz. Then we're going to update the time and everything's good. So I'm just going to change this now to minutes rather than seconds, so it's not so frequent. I'm going to set it to 1 minute and hit save. And if we do a quick refresh, I'm hoping not to see any error messages. Okay, our list is empty. We're not really doing any error checking here, but actually this is timing out. So how do we deal with timeout? Within HTTP-GET there is the ability to add a timeout, and we can put a timeout limit on it. And I think a timeout limit for us is going to be a duration of seconds 10. If we've not got something within 10 seconds, we're probably not going to get it. And so on timeout, what we're going to do is we're just going to, for now, row error. Okay, and then we need to handle that, so let's just do a try catch around getting that, and I'm going to catch the error, and if we do that we're just going to put we have an error. We'll be more graceful with that later, but we're just at that point just going to return. That's going to be okay. That's complaining now because response, in fact all of that can go within the try catch. Okay, let's refresh that. And now we should just go for 10 seconds and then nothing should happen. It should load our list. Let's check. There we go. Okay. Yeah, and it's not loading. That's because I got the IP address wrong. It's 10.2.2. So let's save that. Another restart. And there we go. That's working fine. Okay, how do we know it's working? Well, let's come to the quiz JSON in our server and just update the titles. We'll call this one updated. And maybe call number 3 updated as well. Okay. And I don't know if a minute's passed, but let's hit refresh and see what happens. Not yet. Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds. Now, one of the things we're going to do in the future is also put in version numbers and things like that, so we know what version of quizzes we're on. And we can make all that sort of bit more interesting. I think once we've got this updating work, we've got the core of our functionality in, and we can just then start putting in the niceties of the app. Okay, let's hit refresh again. There we are, and our app is updated. As you can see, we've now got the updated quizzes. And of course, if we refresh anytime within a minute, the app starts almost instantly because there's no updating going on. Excellent. All right, well, that's a lot of progress today. We now have quizzes running. One thing you have to remember is when you close your editor down and come back to it later on, you must make sure you start the server again, or else it's not going to work. Or indeed, put this out on a web page on the website somewhere else. So folks, we'll leave it there for now. If you've enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It does help me out. Hit the notification button to be notified when the next episode comes out, which should be tomorrow. Until then, take care folks. We'll see you soon. Bye now.